Is Fergie really finally clearing off?
The affairs of the royal family tells you that we are living in quite bizarre time.
There is a no-holds-barred, warts-and-all tell-all story waiting to be shared with the world.
What's happened with Andrew losing his title and now her losing Duchess of York, it just proves that the York brand is totally toxic.
Ever-evolving soap opera, that is, of course, what's happening over at Royal Lodge.
The royal family is reportedly nervous. Not about another book from Prince Harry. Not about Meghan's next media appearance. They're worried about someone who's been lurking in the background for decades. Someone who was there for everything, saw everything, and unlike Harry and Meghan, actually knows where all the bodies are buried. Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, is threatening to do a tell-all interview. And according to royal observers, if she actually goes through with it, Harry and Meghan's Oprah sit-down will look like a pleasant afternoon tea by comparison. This wouldn't be vague accusations about concerns over a baby's skin color. This would be specific names, specific incidents, specific scandals spanning 4 decades inside the most secretive institution on earth. The question isn't whether Sarah has explosive stories to tell. Everyone knows she does. The question is whether she'll actually tell them and what price the royal family might pay to keep her quiet. Because unlike other royal rebels, Sarah Ferguson occupies a unique position. She's been both insider and outsider simultaneously for over 30 years. She was married into the family, divorced out of it, yet never fully left. She lived at Royal Lodge with Prince Andrew for decades after their separation. She attended family events when convenient, was excluded when problematic, but always remained close enough to observe everything happening behind palace walls. This makes her extraordinarily dangerous. She doesn't just know Andrew's secrets, she knows everyone's secrets. She was there during Diana's unhappy marriage. She witnessed Charles and Camilla's affair. She saw how the institution treated women who didn't conform. She experienced firsthand how the palace machinery crushes people who become inconvenient. And unlike Harry and Meghan, who left the family relatively quickly, Sarah has been embedded in this world since 1986. That's nearly 4 decades of accumulated knowledge about how the monarchy actually functions behind its carefully maintained facade. Royal journalist Polly Vernon, who recently wrote about the Ferguson threat, believes Sarah will ultimately do the interview. Her reasoning is straightforward. Sarah has very little left to lose. Her reputation took a devastating hit after leaked emails revealed her contact with Jeffrey Epstein, including messages where she apologized for calling him a pedophile and claimed she only did so because she worried about damage to her career. The public reaction was harsh and swift. Whatever residual affection people felt for fabulous Fergie evaporated when those emails emerged. But there's also the money factor. Sarah Ferguson has always needed money and seemingly never has enough, despite decades of commercial ventures, book deals, and whatever financial support she receives from the royal family. The potential payday from a major tell-all interview would be substantial, more than any Mills and Boon romance novel or Weight Watchers endorsement could generate. When you combine her damaged reputation with her perpetual financial need and her vast store of inside knowledge, you get someone with both motive and means to create an interview that would genuinely damage the monarchy. Yet there's something fascinating about the public's relationship with Sarah Ferguson. Despite the Epstein emails, despite decades of scandals and embarrassments, despite behavior that should have made her completely toxic, there remains some residual fondness for her that doesn't exist for Prince Andrew. Part of this stems from how she first appeared on the royal scene. She burst into public consciousness as fun, silly, bumptious. Qualities the royal family had never displayed publicly before. Where Diana was ethereal and beautiful, Sarah was loud and messy and authentically herself in ways that felt refreshing against the stiff formality of palace life. The press initially loved her, dubbing her Fabulous Fergie. But that affection turned quickly when her spending became impossible to ignore. Flying first class from New York with 51 pieces of excess luggage, including £33,000 worth of shopping for which she was charged another £1,000 in fees. and nobody ever explained who paid those charges. Suddenly, Fabulous Fergie became freeloading Fergie, and the media narrative shifted permanently. Her background adds another layer to understanding her character. Her mother was glamorous and exciting, so exciting that she left the family when Sarah was 13 to run off with an Argentinian polo player. From a distance, that story seems endlessly glamorous and romantic. But for a 13-year-old girl, it's simply desertion. It's learning that you weren't enough to make your mother stay. That kind of childhood wound shapes how someone seeks approval, how they spend money, how they present themselves to the world. Money and Sarah's weight became intermingled in troubling ways during the 1990s and early 2000s when she became the spokesperson for Weight Watchers. The move shocked Britain. Weight Watchers was something common people did in drafty village halls, not something associated with royalty, even divorced royalty. Yet there was Sarah, being vulnerable about her weight struggles, leveraging her body for commercial gain in ways that seemed to expose the royal family by extension. She claimed it became her main source of income, implying the royals had left her financially desperate. The whole arrangement felt simultaneously relatable and deeply uncomfortable. This represented a fundamental shift in how the public perceived royals. Diana and Charles had divorced. Andrew and Sarah had separated. But Sarah was doing something different. She was being openly vulnerable about mundane struggles in ways that demolished the mystique surrounding royal life. Whether this was calculated strategy or simply her authentic messiness spilling out is hard to determine. Probably both. There's an argument that Sarah Ferguson has always been allowed to be contradictory, messy, complicated in ways that other royal women weren't. She could be silly and serious, vulnerable and manipulative, authentic and calculating all at once. This made her fascinating, but also made her threatening to an institution built on carefully managed images and controlled narratives. Prince Philip reportedly hated her and refused to be in the same room with her after the infamous toe-sucking photographs emerged in 1992. Those photographs deserve examination because they represent how sexist narratives get constructed around women. The tabloids sold them as Sarah having her toes sucked by financial advisor John Bryan while on vacation. But Bryan has always maintained he was simply kissing her feet as part of a playful game. They would pretend she was a princess and he was a suitor. The actual facts matter less than how the story became weaponized against her. She became the Duchess of Pork in cruel tabloid shorthand, mocked for her weight and her sexuality simultaneously. Yet here's the uncomfortable truth that the Epstein emails forced everyone to confront. Sarah Ferguson crossed lines that can't be excused by claiming she's just authentically messy. She took money from Jeffrey Epstein after he'd been convicted of soliciting prostitution from a minor. Royal author Andrew Loney suggests the amount might have been as much as £2 million, far more than the $15,000 she initially admitted to accepting. And her emails to Epstein, apologizing for calling him a pedophile, using joking language like, "It's so hellacious of me," reveal someone prioritizing money and social position over basic moral judgment. This is where being authentically messy stops being charming and becomes genuinely disturbing. She knew what Epstein was. She knew what he'd been convicted of. And she decided that his money and connections mattered more than the young women he'd abused. That's not forgivable complexity, that's moral bankruptcy. And it's why, despite residual fondness for her earlier fun-loving persona, most people now view her with a combination of disgust and fascination. The timeline of Sarah's royal life reveals how long she's been living in this strange liminal space. Born in 1959, married to Andrew in 1986, first child Beatrice in 1988, second daughter Eugenie in 1990, separated by 1992. It's remarkable to realize that as recently as 1992, the royal family still believed they could simply announce separations and expect the public and media to politely ignore whatever happened afterward. The deception was naked, but considered appropriate for maintaining royal dignity. The infamous photographs with John Bryan were taken that same year. He's actually a fascinating character himself, a Texas financial advisor who became friends with the family and even counseled Andrew during the early stages of the Epstein scandal, telling him to get ahead of the story and be honest. Bryan eventually walked away when he realized Andrew had been lying to him, claiming he'd never met Virginia Giuffre when evidence suggested otherwise. What's striking is that Sarah hasn't actually been a working member of the royal family since 1992. That's over 30 years of living off royal resources without official status. She lived at one end of Royal Lodge while Andrew occupied the other. She's apparently set up a bar there called the Dog House, where she drinks champagne with staff and friends while bemoaning her situation. The self-pity is grating, but the arrangement itself is bizarre. A divorced couple living in the same enormous property for decades, both essentially supported by the monarchy, despite neither performing official duties. King Charles's decision to bring Sarah back into the royal fold during his reign struck many observers as strange. She'd been excluded from major family events for years, only allowed to visit Balmoral after Prince Philip left because he refused to share space with her. But Charles started inviting her to Christmas, to various royal occasions, even to a cancer charity event at Buckingham Palace after she revealed her own cancer diagnosis. For a brief moment, it seemed like she'd successfully rehabilitated herself and regained acceptance within the family. The cynical interpretation is that Charles wanted to be remembered as Charles the Merciful, the king who reunited the fractured family and showed compassion to those previously excluded. He wanted to be seen as the great convener. But Queen Elizabeth left him a cracked vase, metaphorically speaking. If you held it carefully in the right light, you couldn't see the damage. But Charles put too much light on it, drawing attention to problems better left in shadow. The vase has now shattered in his hands. The tragedy, beyond the actual victims of Epstein and Maxwell, which remains the real tragedy, is that Charles's legacy may ultimately be defined by the Andrew debacle, and to a lesser extent, the Sarah problem. He's not expected to reign as long as people once hoped, given his age and health concerns. And instead of being remembered for environmental advocacy or modernizing the monarchy, he'll likely be remembered for harboring his brother despite mounting evidence of serious misconduct. But back to the interview threat. Would we watch if Sarah Ferguson sat down with someone like Oprah to tell her full story? Absolutely. The story she could tell would raise hair on heads worldwide. She was there through Diana's struggles. She witnessed how the institution treated women who didn't conform. She knows about Andrew's behavior, Charles's affairs, decades of scandals, both public and private. Her perspective as perpetual insider-outsider, too close to be fully excluded but never fully accepted, gives her unique insight into how the monarchy actually functions. Journalists who've interviewed many celebrities can recognize certain types. Sarah Ferguson is the type who tells you things you didn't ask about, who goes much further than you ever imagined they would, who brings up extraordinary revelations you hadn't dared hope for. When you listen back to the tape afterward, you keep thinking, damn, why did I interrupt? And I need 7,000 words, not 3,000. She's incapable of calculated discretion in the way palace training typically instills. She spills emotionally and verbally in ways the institution has never been able to control. Yet there's reason to think this might all be an elaborate negotiation tactic rather than genuine threat. Recent media coverage of the interview possibility seems strategically planted by sources on Sarah's side, all emphasizing that she knew nothing about Epstein, a line that won't survive serious questioning given the financial relationship and email evidence. The whole thing feels like testing waters and applying pressure during ongoing negotiations. Because ultimately, the royal family will need to give her somewhere to live and provide some form of financial support. They can't openly give her a house. The public outcry would be enormous. But she's been a de facto tenant or squatter on royal property for 30 years. Despite stories of Swiss chalets sold for £13 million and London townhouses worth millions, there never seems to be any actual money at Sarah's core. No sustainable business, no explicable wealth source beyond occasional book deals that don't generate mansion buying income. Reliable sources suggest she's still getting her laundry done by Buckingham Palace staff. If that's failure and humiliation, most people would gladly accept such circumstances. There's something absurd about the image of Andrew and Sarah holed up in their 7-bedroom home on the Sandringham estate, which probably isn't actually falling apart despite that being the narrative. Ordering things on Amazon while issuing demands about wanting bigger houses. It's entitled, ridiculous, and somehow very on-brand for both of them. So will Sarah Ferguson actually do the tell-all interview that terrifies the palace? The smart money says she's using the threat as leverage to secure better terms in whatever arrangement is being negotiated. But there's also the possibility that she might decide she has so little reputation left to protect that burning everything down offers perverse appeal. The residual fondness people feel for her could actually work in her favor during such an interview. Viewers might be more willing to believe her precisely because she's been so authentically messy all along. And if she does sit down for that interview, if she decides to tell everything she's seen and experienced over nearly 40 years orbiting the royal family, Harry and Meghan's revelations will indeed look like a sweet shop visit by comparison, because Sarah Ferguson doesn't deal in vague accusations about institutional racism or feeling unsupported. She deals in names, dates, specific incidents, and decades of accumulated insider knowledge. That's what makes her genuinely dangerous. That's why the royals are nervous. That's it for today, folks. See you in the next video.